This is the third part to a video series that will walk through installing and configuring workflow in SharePoint Server 2013. The first thing we want to do is log into the workflow server, and this is the server where we added the workflow setup account, so we'll log in as that account. And once we're on the workflow server where we're going to install Workflow Manager, it installs as a web PI link. So what we'll do is we'll open Internet Explorer, and there's many ways to get to this installation link, but the way I prefer is to go to the SharePoint 2013 Workflow Resource Center, and I just search for that and open that up. And these are all the links about workflow in SharePoint 2013. And in the Deploy section we have the Install and Configure Workflow article, and we'll click the link to view the article. And this walks through the entire process we're doing today, but for right now I'm just going to click the Workflow Manager installation link. And this is all of the information about Workflow Manager, and I'll click the Installing Workflow Manager link and then click the Web PI link. And what this is doing is launching Web PI, the Web Platform Installer, and we want to install Workflow Manager 1.0, so we'll click Install, accept the agreement, and it will automatically go out and download Workflow Manager for us and install it on the workflow server here. So that's done, so we'll click Continue, and this automatically launches the configuration wizard, but we'll come back to that. So close that, click Finish, and we'll exit this. The next thing I want to do is make sure to find out if there's any updates for Workflow Manager and also Service Bus, which is a component of Workflow Manager. So I'm going to go to the Microsoft Download Center and search for Workflow Manager. And this is, we could download Workflow Manager here, but I'm just looking for the updates for now. So I'm going to sort based on the newest, and I'm going to find the cumulative update for Workflow Manager, which came out in March 7th, but make sure that you find the latest update. And I'm installing in English, so I'm going to download and run this update. I'll click Accept, I'll click Next, and I'll click Next. So this is installing the update for Workflow Manager and also the Workflow Manager client. That's complete, so I'll click Finish. And now I want to do the exact same thing for Service Bus. So I'm going to search for Service Bus in the Download Center. And I'm going to sort these by newest to oldest so that I can make sure I have the most recent cumulative update. And make sure I have, here's the cumulative update for Service Bus, so I'll click that to update it. Again, I'll make sure I'm installing the English version. I'll run the update, and yes, I'll accept. Click Next, accept the agreement, Next, and Next. And that's finished, so I'll click Finish. And we now have Workflow Manager installed. Now that we have Workflow Manager installed, the next step is to configure it. In this scenario, I want to use Secure Socket Layer to encrypt communication between Workflow Manager and SQL Server and Workflow Manager and SharePoint. Before I can run Workflow Manager configuration, I need to make sure that I have the correct certificates installed on the Workflow server. To do this, I will open up the Microsoft Management Console and add the certificate snap-in. I'll bring up the Start menu, I'll type MMC and hit Enter. I'll say yes to allow permissions. And now we have the MMC console. I need to add the certificate snap-in, so I'll click Add Remove, Snap-ins, select Certificates. I want to make sure to use the computer account, and I'll click Finished. Click OK, and now we have the certificate snap-in. In this snap-in, I want to point out that in the Personal and the Certificates folder, there's automatically an auto-signed workflow certificate, but what I want to do is request a new certificate from the certificate authority. So I'll right-click on the Certificates folder, I'll choose All Tasks and Request New Certificate. Click Next, click Next. And what this is doing is querying the certificate authority, which is also our Active Directory Certificate Services server. So it's contacted the server, and we could view some of the details about the certificate that we're requesting. I want to click Computer and click Enroll. And what this is doing is requesting the certificate for SSL from the certificate authority. And now that's completed, so we have our certificate, so we'll click Finish, and we can see our new certificate here in the certificates directory, and we're now ready to configure workflow. And the first thing I want to do is go to the Start menu, and I'll click the Workflow Manager configuration. I'll click Yes to allow changes to the computer, and on this screen I want to click the Custom Settings. I will enter the SQL Server computer that we're using to host SQL Server, and then I want to click Advanced. In this scenario, I want to enable SSL with SQL Server communication. Scroll down and look at the other settings. The database names I'll leave as the defaults. On the Configure Service account, I want to use the Workflow Service account that we set up previously, and I'll give that its password. And then I want to uncheck the Configure Certificates Auto-Generate checkbox, and I want to use the certificate that we requested from the certificate authority. So I'll browse on these three certificates and choose our workflow.contoso.local certificate so that it's using SSL from the Active Directory Certificate Services Authority. And then I want to make sure for the administrative group for workflow, I want to use the group we created previously, the Workflow Admins group. And finally, I want to test the connection to make sure we can talk to the SQL Server. And I want to point out that testing the connection to the SQL Server database using SSL, this is a point where you might run into some issues. And a couple of the things that you'll want to watch out for are first to make sure that SSL is enabled for SQL Server to your through the firewall on your SQL Server machine. If it's not enabled, then this will fail. A lot of times it's common that the firewall will be open for standard SQL Server traffic, but not for the SSL encrypted traffic. And you should also check that the certificate that you're using, that you requested, has the fully qualified domain name. And in our case, we requested it from the certificate authority. So you'll notice that I typed in sql.contoso.local. If I'd only typed SQL and tested the connection, that would have worked without the SSL enabled. But once I enabled the SSL and it looks at the certificate, that common name in the certificate must match the fully qualified domain name of the server that requested it. And so it all looks good, so we'll click the Next button to go to the Service Bus configuration screen. And on this screen, the Service Bus configuration screen, we will scroll down, and I want to make sure to configure the same service account as was used for the Workflow Manager. I also want to go through again and select our certificates for the SSL communication. And I want to scroll down, and I want to make sure that I'm using the administrative group for workflow, the group we created earlier, the workflow admin, so I'll type that in here. And then I'll quickly scroll back up. That should be everything. I'll use the default ports and the default databases, and I'm just going to click Test the Connection just to feel better about this before I click the Go Ahead and Configure button. So it looks good, so I'll click the Next button. And this will provide a summary of all of the configuration changes that we selected on both the Workflow Manager and the Service Bus configuration screens. And this all looks good, so I'll click the Install button. And what I've done here is I've compressed the video timeline. This can take up to 10 minutes as it goes out, and what this is doing is contacting the SQL Server and creating the databases and setting the configuration. And as that finishes, if it's successful, we'll see all the green checks, and if there's any errors, we can review them.